Welcome back to episode 190 of Tall Boy Radio. And as we always say, who knows where it goes when the beer flows? Well, I'll tell you exactly where it goes. It's taking a stairway to seven, as we're going to be talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers adding to their magnificent haul of trophies. But before we get to that, let's get to a man who's at the other end of that experience. Gaz?
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Adam. Unfortunately, those people that know me know I'm a Chicago Bears fan, so silverware is something that we are sadly lacking of recently. However, I am confident that we will perform better this year than last year, and before you say it, no, we couldn't do much worse. So, looking forward to this. I love talking NFL. Love talking to particularly a couple of Brits about the NFL, and that gives a little bit of a teaser as to who we might have on tonight. But looking forward to this, dude.
Indeed. And from a man who supports a team that does little to a man who doesn't support a team and knows little, Dave?
Evening all. Yeah, well, this podcast's quite full tonight, so I think it's only fair that I reduce the amount of talking I do to give others the opportunity. It's absolutely nothing to do with my knowledge.
A good experience to learn. So, as Gaz alluded to there, we've got a couple of guys who have hosted a podcast about the NFL. It's called Pigskin Podcast. They're based in the UK, as he said. James, Mark, who wants to go first?
Oh, should I give us a little intro then, James? We never knew each other until I started to do an NFL podcast. I was like, I'm going to do one. I worked in radio, and I was like, right, I'm going to just get some practice in. That was basically the plan. And I thought I need a draft expert. James is a draft expert. So I picked someone else. They pulled out on the day before. And I messaged this stranger and said, hey, do you want to do a podcast with me? This guy's dropped out, thinking it would be a one-off. And then I'd get rotating hosts. And then we did 100 and something episodes. And yeah, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a great experience. It was one of those where I sort of been around doing bits and pieces for a few websites on both sides of the Atlantic, nothing particularly significant. And yeah, this guy sort of gets in touch and says, do you want to do a podcast? And I think, yeah, all right, that's fine. That's going to be in someone's front room somewhere. And he's like, oh yeah, just me. I won't say who, but yeah, just meet me at this national broadcaster, and we'll use one of their studios to record. And I was like, bloody hell, this guy's serious. I better do some actual prep before turning up at this. So, yeah, and the rest, we 100 odd episodes, no lawsuits, and
18 months before my bosses found out what I was doing. So really good.
Yeah. Fair play, that's pretty cool. Well, we can't offer you any salubrious studios or anything like that, so hope you haven't done too much prep, because we generally don't.
Not at all.
So what we're going to be doing tonight, we're going to be looking at the start of the NFL season, which I think is this weekend coming up. So we've got a few exciting features, a few exciting games. So who wants to go first and tell us a little bit about their side and what they're going to do this season? And hello, Stuart. Thank you for listening. Who wants to go first?
I think we should hand it over to the guest first.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think. I have got one question for the 49ers fan.
Hit me.
So, who's Brock? I don't know the guy. I've hardly recognised the name. He's going to be a starting QB. I don't know whether you want to give us a bit of info about that, because I certainly haven't heard of him.
I mean, last year, just to roll it back, last year Brock Purdy was he was Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the draft, and I think everyone like me thought he's never going to see the field. He'll be lucky if he makes the roster. Start a camp, he starts doing really well, or he might unseat Jimmy Garoppolo like this, captain average. But I mean that in a nice way. He just steady as you go. I'm thinking he won't ever see the field. Jimmy Garoppolo gets his sort of twice weekly injury, and Brock Purdy's in, plays brilliantly. And then all of a sudden, the level of the game they start playing is so much higher. And it looks like we're going to win a Super Bowl right up until the point we play the Eagles and they tears a ligament in his elbow, which it's probably the most painful injury I could think of. And he's out. And then we end up starting. Well, I mean, we had Christian McCaffrey at quarterback at one point. So that gives you an idea of how well that game went.
Wow.
For this year, I mean, I don't know if he's ready. I was really comfortable with the fact that we would have him and Trey Lance on the roster, because one of them would be good enough. Having just him has a lot of faith in him, and I'm not so confident on our backups now. So, yeah, it's a dodgy position.
You're absolutely starting at least Sam Darnold starting at least half a dozen games, isn't he?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Sam Darnold.
That's definitely going to happen.
And to be fair, I mean, Sam Darnold obviously, has been around a bit, possibly more well known. Does he cut it? Not in my opinion, but as I say, we'll wait and see. I mean, he's obviously going to play some game time, so hey ho, whatever way the cookie crumbles.
If I had my way, I'd have him starting. So it's I think you put him in that Shanahan system with the San Francisco run, which is very quarterback friendly system. I think that's the kind of nurturing coaching he's just not had. And he's still only like in his early to mid 20s. It seems like he's a name that's been around for a decade. He's still potentially got 10 years left in him. It wouldn't surprise me if, yes, he does start a bunch of games, but also that he performs to a pretty significant standard.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, here's another question then. Sorry, go on, Dave.
I was just going to ask a question, and it's about how it works. So for people that don't follow NFL at all, it might help a bit. But I watched a film, a while ago, and it was called I can't remember, something about the guy who.
And there's Dave's knowledge of the NFL.
It's all right. We'll work it out.
No, it was. You will work it out. I'll tell you. It's a quiz. Right? It's a film. And it's got Brad Pitt in it, and he didn't go to the Red Sox. He stayed.
Oh, is it Moneyball?
Moneyball. There we go. Top marks. Mark, well done.
Is that
so in Moneyball, which is actually a really good film, and it's not about the process and the data and everything they did in that, but it's about the draft. And one thing's this thing called the draft, where the teams get to pick which players they want. And I don't know how that works, but does that start every season? Like every player is available for every team?
The way it works is every team. So the NFL has this whole thing about equity and equality. So basically the idea is that the worst teams have the best opportunity to get better. So they have, the team that does the worst in the season before has the first pick in the next draft, gives them an opportunity to pick, the best prospect coming from college. Some teams are historically good at picking. The Steelers are a team that generally tend to do quite well. Some teams are absolutely crap at it, like the Cleveland Browns in many years past. They could have all the picks in the world at the top of the draft, and they'd still pick someone that was, a 5'10" quarterback with personal problems. It just depends. That's how it works. So it's essentially your first shot at the best youth prospects rather than everybody that's available.
So it's just the college system.
Yeah.
From watching that film, what they seem to do, some of them, is they seem to pick, or I might have been mixing this up with the NBA basketball, but they seem to pick a really good player intentionally to then immediately trade it for 2 or 3 average players from another team. Is that what goes on?
It happens less in the NFL. Trades are becoming much more prominent during the draft. There've been a couple of very high-profile trades on draft night, right at the top of the board. There was one, the Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers trade between the then San Diego Chargers and the New York Giants, where Eli Manning basically refused to, said in the pre-draft process, there's no way he's going to go and play in San Diego. So they ended up.
Also, one of my all-time favorite moments, I should say, where he's holding the jersey like it's infecting him. Right?
And then, effectively, they just swapped the players over, and a trade sort of happened. So Phillip Rivers was drafted by the Giants, knowing that was the quarterback that San Diego really, would have and would settle with, and they kind of flipped over. The irony in all of that is it was the same draft that Ben Roethlisberger went to the Steelers and was probably the best of them all, and sort of went happily sort of 10, 15 picks later. So I think the draft is a really interesting process. It's one of the things that I love about the sport. It gives it that parity, and for a country that's so sort of spooked and terrified by socialism, America really sort of embraces this idea of helping the worst team by giving them the best player. When it comes to their sports, it's absolutely fascinating. But you compare something like that for the Premier League, where we don't really have that system. But the only thing I could think of would be the best player coming out of one of the academies would end up going to Luton Town this year, and you think about what that would look like. Say I don't know, someone like Cole Palmer, instead of going for £40 million to Chelsea, ends up playing for Luton, and you can instantly see how they would become a lot better and a lot closer to their nearest rivals when that happens. It's what keeps it fluid. As Mark says, the where the system lets it down is that there are so many GMs and head coaches who are just so bad at the scouting process and at the pre-draft process that
and that's part of the fun.
Too much and then go. But that's what makes draft night so much fun as well.
It is, and interesting enough when you say that as well about Roethlisberger. So Roethlisberger went to the Steelers and was an absolute legend for us for the best part of 20 years. And interesting enough, as a man from Ohio was expecting to maybe have some interest from Cleveland, which never came. They passed on him, and he ended up, becoming a legend with the Steelers, who then went on to win more games in Cleveland than their last 7 or 8 quarterbacks put together. So an absolute legend. Just to give you a little bit more information on the draft as well, like as our good friend there correctly said, we have got a pretty good record. And not only that, I think our last time we had a top 5 pick in the draft, we picked the original TB12. Terry Bradshaw. That's how far it goes back. Yeah, that was the last time we had a top 5 draft pick. We've been pretty successful in between. Helps that the Browns are in our conference.
It's strange because obviously as a Chicago Bears fan, one of the infamous, I suppose, mistakes was we gave up the opportunity to sign Patrick Mahomes, and we could have gone Patrick Mahomes. We ended up with Mitch Trubisky.
Well, so did we.
Well, yeah. So and there was the famous sort of clip where he either passed for a touchdown or he maybe rushed for a touchdown, and he'd give it like number 5 or whatever. So you could have had me 5th round, first round, 5th pick or whatever, and you decided to pass up on me, and you just think, oh, we could have had that generational QB. It could have been him.
Can I just add to that? Generational QBs that got out of the room. We twice the 49ers missed an absolute game changer. So you have Tom Brady, a California kid, absolutely wanted to play for the 49ers. Pictured in 49ers gear his whole life, wanted to play for the 49ers. He wasn't such a golden arm prospect. But then later on, we had the choice. The first overall pick, so you've got no one that can beat you to this pick. We had a choice between Alex Smith and Aaron Rodgers. And we looked and went, let's go for the middling guy. He looks like he's going to do really well for 10 years and totally become a Hall of Fame legend. That worked out really well.
Well, so for the 49ers this season, then you got an interesting first game, didn't you?
Yeah, you guys. I have to say, James will know this. Like when we used to do this podcast on a regular basis, we would get in, and it was brilliant because I didn't pick the 49ers because I was a glory hunter. I'm a West Ham fan, and my choice of the 49ers was I was searching for a team that were currently in the same position that West Ham were in, which was middling, had some success last good in the 80s and 90s. That was my sort of, and I was like, the 49ers look pretty good for that. So, which meant I had to put up with lots of 3 and 13 seasons and, terrible.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah. Well, I can remember one of the years was you guys getting to the Super Bowl. So that's like when I started following,
Yeah.
Around 2000
with Rex Grossman, I believe. Rex Grossman at the time. Another household name.
Yeah. and the big thing from that Super Bowl was, of course, the kickoff touchdown that started it all for the Colts. But yeah, anyway, when we get into that, like I'm used to being crap. Is basically what I'm saying. My expectations are so low. They were raised by Jim Harbaugh. He disappeared, and then we had a guy who looked like a porn star. And Chip Kelly, who was an absolute disaster. And then from that point on, we've had Kyle Shanahan, who's been brilliant. And every year under Kyle Shanahan, I've been like, this is the year we win the Super Bowl. Every year. And I've never felt that ever. And then this year, I've started the season and I thought, oh, this is the year that Kyle Shanahan probably gets sacked, and it's not his fault. That's That's generally where I'm at this year.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I'll be interested to see how Purdy goes on anyway when we've got TJ Watt bearing down on him. See if we can inflict a couple of those famous injuries upon him.
I'm not looking optimistically towards this season. We haven't got Nick Bosa still hasn't signed a contract, so I don't think he'll be playing. Which is, for those of you who don't know, he's the reigning defensive player of the year. So, fairly important. It's quite a stressful situation. We've got loads of talent across the team. But yeah, I think losing Jimmy Garoppolo is a much maligned player, but having had the security of a player like that doesn't really make mistakes as often as people suggest, he generally does exactly what he's supposed to do. He gets you within, he'll never do anything exceptional, which separates him from like the Patrick Mahomes and the Josh Allens, but he would do his job really well. And then going into someone that is less experienced, more likely to make mistakes, more likely to do something that just makes you go, why? And then also the other player that we've lost is Robbie Gould, who is, as much as it's weird to put so much value in a kicker, was probably the best, most consistent kicker outside Tucker. So, yeah, that's a really, really stressful year coming up. But I still think we'll beat you guys. No offense.
I'd definitely take Robbie Gould back. I know the double doink and all of that sort of thing, but I'd take him back 100%. He was superb for us.
It's interesting, to be honest with you. I'm intrigued how this season goes. We've had an unbeaten pre-season, as it were, which counts for nothing. We know that counts for nothing. It never has.
So did the Detroit Lions, and they went 0-16. Just saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and aren't I glad that they're in our division?
Well, 100%, yeah. Well, I'm interested to see how Kenny goes on this year for us. I'm not 100% convinced that he is the right guy or the right pick for, pardon the pun, for the Steelers. Tomlin doesn't get an awful lot wrong, but I'd be interested to know what you guys think about him and whether you think he was like in the pick that we selected in that, that year. I think he was the only quarterback to go as a first round draft pick. So what are you guys' thoughts on this guy?
I think they've surrounded him with enough talent that he's in a position where he should be able to succeed. I think Najee Harris is a solid, reliable, when he's healthy, every down back, which I think gives you that that outlet. I think you look at the wide receivers there. I think Deontay Johnson's potentially looking at a very good year. You saw that connection with George Pickens really start to develop as well. So he has everything around him. I think there's probably a couple of question marks on the offensive line. But what with that and the defense looking, pretty studly still, he's got, he's not going to be gassed. He's not, I'm not expecting him to go out there and have to throw 50 passes a game to win matches. And I think if you can keep his load limited, use the run game and the talent that's around him, he's got every opportunity of succeeding. I think there's still some growth there. He looks like a player that got better the more games he's got, which is helpful, which is what you want. And he seemed to sort of pick himself up when he made mistakes, which, a lot of young quarterbacks, particularly rookie quarterbacks, in that kind of environment, particularly somewhere like Pittsburgh, where they're used to successful quarterbacks, that kind of environment can spook a young quarterback, and he wasn't at all. And he kind of lived up to it, and it started to take more of that kind of leadership role. You're seeing him speak a lot more confidently with the media. I think he's. I suspect the Steelers have quite a good year. I think the game against the 49ers it's a really interesting flashpoint between two franchise quarterbacks. Yeah, I use the term lightly in Brock Purdy. On very different ends of the scale with very different levels of expectation coming off their teams as well. So it might be the game of the week, to be honest.
I should say at this stage, Brock Purdy, I feel like I've not given him his props. Like, if you want to kind of explain who Brock Purdy is, you put him alongside Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo is tweed. He's sensible. He is sort of, he's something that won't be a mess. He'll look comfortable in front of your parents. Brock Purdy is like someone coming in with oil. I mean, it's not, but I was trying to think of a fabric that worked. He's like oil stained denim. So he's like this guy who's going to turn up. He's completely wrong. He'll do everything he shouldn't do, but he somehow makes it work. If you get a chance after this to have a look at some of his plays from last year, he will throw the ball into a space and you go, well, that's going to be picked off. And it's a perfect pass that goes this far out of someone's reach. And it's incredible. The consistency that he did that with, unbelievable. And he would have had a touchdown of the year last year. He threw it to Brandon Ayuk here, having run halfway around Levi Stadium, got it to his hands and he dropped it. And it's like, that's what he's going to offer. He's going to offer that. Looking at Kenny Pickett, I think he's got that, that potential to do something similar, to just energize a team. They've had a very stable quarterback for a long time. Last year wasn't the best. I mean, Duck Hodges is a player that has an amazing name, but not an amazing record as a QB. I think he's definitely an upgrade. And I think this will be a better season for the Steelers. And I think the NFL is better for it. When I started following the NFL, the biggest rivalry in the NFL was the Steelers and the Ravens. And I really want to see the Steelers get back to that level so we can see those games again.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I think the Ravens have probably got a pretty good season ahead of them as well. The Bengals, unfortunately, are looking fairly strong. Is it Burrows there at QB? He seems like he's a real talent as well. So I think the AFC conference is actually starting to look a little bit tasty, which could potentially spell bad news for us.
It's a great time to be in the
NFC. Yeah. So what about the Giants then? Tell us about the Giants. How did you come to be following the Giants? Oh, hang on, Dave. Before that, Dave has one of his bizarre questions about a film that no one's seen from 1967.
Well, to be honest, because you guys obviously know what you're talking about, but it's just names and terms and phrases. It's just going straight over my head. So I thought I'd ask another question based on my knowledge of NFL, which is from the film Moneyball, which I've remembered was about baseball, not NFL.
I did say that when you first said it.
And James just mentioned a phrase. He referred. This is going back about 10 minutes now. You referred to the GM, and that made me think: is it the same in baseball? They had the GM, which was basically the guy who was entirely responsible for getting the players and putting them together, and then the manager was a completely separate person who had to actually do his best with that team. Is there that massive disconnect that there was certainly in that film in baseball?
I think it's changing. You've obviously got some coaches have a lot more power than others. But broadly, yeah, it's, to put it in the context of the Premier League, it's sort of your sporting director or your director of football given a hugely inflated job description. So they would be responsible for all the signings, all the transfers, all the contracts, and then the players are kind of just handed over to the coach and you're told, right, coach them. Where it works best is where the hires are kind of done jointly. So the owners work to bring in a head coach and the GM concurrently, or the one effectively helps select the other. It's not uncommon despite the fact the GM is probably a slightly higher up in the food chain, it's not uncommon for a head coach to effectively select his general manager, or select the people he wants for his general manager. So yeah, there absolutely is that disconnect. That still exists. I mean, we saw something a couple of weeks ago where Jerry Jones, who's the owner and still the GM at the Cowboys, I think he might have handed it over to his son. So one of the most storied franchises and one of the most bizarre and eccentric owners in the division.
It's being kind.
That's very, especially for a Giants fan. Well, I'm sort of holding my tongue a little bit. I don't want to come up straight away. But went and signed a backup quarterback. Didn't even tell the head coach. It's like, well, when did this happen? And he came and said, oh, nobody knew about it. Basically it was completely under wraps, and we just we signed him and moved on. That was Trey Lance when he came in, and it was like, well, you've gone and brought in a very high-ranking backup quarterback, a guy who was selected very high in the draft a few years ago, a guy who a lot of people think has a lot of potential, and the Cowboys already have a very strong, sturdy, reliable starting quarterback. Didn't tell the quarterback, didn't tell the coaching staff. Basically, a few people in the personnel team knew about it, and then he just sort of turned up. I mean, it's it's quite the most bizarre way of doing business. That it's just completely, alien. If you're not used to the sport, it just seems like a very odd way of running a sports team, because it's so different to the way we're used to seeing our teams run in football.
Yeah, I mean that's where it struck to me. It just seemed crazy, but and I guess from what you're saying, it goes on, and like football, it's just degrees. In some football clubs, we know the people in the offices have more sway over the players that are picked than the manager, and in other clubs, managers will just refuse to work at a club unless they're the ones controlling. So I suppose it's similar to that. Then
I think the difference in compared to the Premier League is that, unlike the Premier League, you'll rarely hear fans calling for their director of football to be sacked. Whereas in the NFL, there's a much stricter divide. So there's less expectation that the head coach is going to be sitting in the draft room picking the players. So if you've got a team that is playing well with the players they've got, but hasn't been able to put talent on the team, that's the general manager's responsibility. And if they've failed, they're going at the end of the year. Whereas if you get the opposite, where you've got a really strong team with the best players best players with quality, it'll be the head coach going. And if you've got neither, then you're both going, and you're the Cardinals.
Yeah, and then on top of that as well, Dave, there's a number of coaches as well there, and you look at like Matt Canada, who's been lambasted as our offensive coach for the Steelers. People have been calling for his head. There's a lot of faith in Tomlin, a lot of faith in Mike Tomlin, who's the head coach of that side. Because, he gets results. He's not had a losing season in all the 18, 19 years he's been there.
I think when you look at the Steelers, I think Tomlin's done. Actually, when you look at the turmoil that the Steelers franchise has gone through, semi-recently, the last 4, 5, 6 years, I think Tomlin's done an incredible job to maintain a winning season. When you think of the circus around Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown. So you look at that circus, and you look at succession planning in terms of, right, what do we do post Roethlisberger? I think he's done a phenomenal job. Yeah. I really do.
Yeah, I do. So did we get to then how you came to become a Giants fan?
Me, my Giants fandom goes back to John Madden '92, when I was 10 years old, probably 8 years old, 9 years old, something like that. It was coming off the year they'd played. I'm gonna say they played who did they play?
Bills.
Bills must have been the Bills, mustn't it? Yeah, in the Super Bowl, and they were one of the two default teams you could play. And as that sort of eager kid with a snares in front of him, you kind of just like press the buttons as quickly as you can to get it started, and the Giants fell on there, and I've sort of been a Giants fan ever since. It's as unsophisticated way of picking your team as you can probably have. First time I went to New York was the gap between the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl, where we ended up turning over the then unbeaten Patriots. So I was sort of caught up with it a bit at that point as well, where you're just sort of like, well, great, excellent. So now I'm in New York and the Giants are doing well and blah, blah, blah. And so it was sealed and then cemented probably, 10, 15 years after that. So
I just had a flashback, and James knows this. I was in New York during draft week. So just to explain, the draft used to be in New York every year. I went, I think the first year it wasn't in New York. It just happened to be there, which is a bit bad timing on my part. But I had 3 friends, none of whom were interested in the NFL, one of whom's vaguely interested in sport, and the other 2 had no idea what I'd taken them into. It's like, let's just go to a bar. This is a really good time to go to a bar. What about this bar? Oh, look, it just happens to be a sports bar. Brilliant. Let's sit down. Everyone get a drink. And I wanted to be in a bar when the first round pick was being made. So just like it's like the draft is incredible because it's human drama. It's like the transfer window, but if you had a camera in every player's room as it's about to happen, right? And you're seeing it from both sides. It's done in a big room, and I'll never forget. Right, so the Giants were picking 15th, I think, that year, and there's all this excitement. Are they going to go and pick one of these amazing quarterback prospects that are on offer? Are they going to pick the top defensive player in the room? And he comes in and he's like, and with the 15th pick of the first round, the New York Giants select Daniel Jones and the entire bar, I'm not joking, just went, ah!
Boo,
Smashing
pissed.
things on the table, and all my friends, what's happened here? And I was messaging James going, just to let you know, Daniel Jones has gone down a storm in New York.
Dave, just as a little bit of context. So obviously you get the draft and you will get the team that was worse the previous year and so on. And there's lots of sort of hype and expectation around who goes first, who's going to be the first pick. So basically the team that finishes worst, who are they going to pick? And quite a lot of the time you will trade. So before the draft starts, what will happen is you say, right, well, actually, we're due to pick this one, but we don't really want that. But we're prepared to sort of trade up or down, which means that we're prepared to give another team a higher pick if they then release 2 or 3 later picks. So you can build your squad in a number of different ways. But there's always that sort of high jinx. It's in, I don't know, the Chicago Bears with the first pick. Well, we didn't because we traded it. So we traded the first pick. So actually we ended up with like 2 second rounds and a third round or whatever, but there's always a little bit of that. Who's going to go first? Who's going to go? And you can sort of, at times you can sort of predict, but sometimes it's a bit like a, and you sort of, it's like, oh my God, did that came really out of left field? I didn't expect that. Something in it. Oh my God. And I think just to answer one of the questions was, does a player that gets picked in the draft have to go to the team that picks them? Well, yeah. I suppose unless you do what sort of James did earlier, where there is that trade, and there's always a pre-arranged trade, then yeah.
There's a few exceptions, isn't there? I was going to think, legendary John Elway famously played his hand and said, hey, I've got the Yankees who want me to play baseball. I don't have to play for anyone. And it does become Kyler Murray recently. He's the Cardinals quarterback. He was trying to parlay the same thing, and it didn't work out. But you're right. James was probably going to say,
yeah, you have to be of that kind of elite standard. I mean, Kyler Murray would have been much better off playing baseball. Yeah. But John Elway was, a generational name, a household name of the 90s playing it. For the most part, I think you put yourself in the process that pretty much every college in America, irrespective of division, has a football team. So it is highly competitive. Only 250 players or so get picked for the draft. If you are fortunate enough, and particularly, you think about, your Tom Brady's and your Aaron Rodgers, and they've come through, elite training and private education and the best colleges and what have you. Most of these kids come from really, really poor upbringings, really, really struggling. You hear some of the just horror stories of the lives that they've led prior to that. If you get the opportunity to go and play professional sport at someone like that, you don't care where you're playing it. It's changing your life, it's changing your family's life, and it's going to change your kids' lives. So you kind of move past that. The Giants drafted a player a few years ago called Justin Pugh in the first round, who came from a ardent Eagles family, born and raised in Pennsylvania, bitter rivals of the Giants, and the Giants took him. And the pictures of him because they always have like the cameras in their sort of front rooms, just as if someone had just opened up an old can of rancid dog meat. They're all like, "Oh, he's got the Giants," and he had to sort of sit there and sort of go, "Yeah."
And he's there with a cap on. He's the Giants cap on. Was like,
no. Still like his brothers, like, "Oh, he's gone to the Giants." But he still played. He did really well, and I think he made a Pro Bowl and did had a solid career for sort of 5 or 6 years with us. But I think you just, unless you're so far up the chain, most people will just take playing for anyone. And to a certain extent, what you see is wanting to go in the first round. If you get drafted in the first round, if you're not going to be a first round prospect, just getting drafted somewhere. You don't really care if you're in the second round or the 7th round.
It's worth flagging as well that when you're drafted, there's a monetary value to each draft position. So like the first overall draft pick is going to get a significantly higher wage than the 5th, and it's exponential. So by the time you get to the bottom of the first round, it's a big cut. When you get out of the first round, there's 7 rounds in the draft. It's even more. And then if you miss the draft entirely, actually at the bottom of the draft, weirdly, if you're one of the last picks, you get financially less money than someone that is undrafted normally, who gets picked, because they've got a set scale, but everyone that's not been drafted, it's a free for all. So they just get whatever the hell is left.
Is that salary? So your salary is dictated to where you're picked on the draft.
Yeah,
your initial
salary. Yeah, your first year contract, effectively. Yeah, and if you go first, you're talking like multi-million pound. It's not like you start there and then you sort of prove yourself and you might get an incremental bonus or whatever. Literally, like your first round is like you will get a significant amount of money.
It used to be wild as well. Cam Newton, I think, was the last one in the old.
Sam Bradford, I think, wasn't it?
Sam Bradford was the last one? Yeah, Sam Bradford was the last one in the old, and Cam Newton was the first one in the new.
Yeah,
and just the difference, the difference was running into sort of hundreds of millions of pounds.
I think Sam Bradford got something like $90 million up front, which is like he was the first overall pick, and he had a fairly middling career, it's fair to say. And then, like James said, Cam Newton won an MVP. He won, he got to the Superbowl. He was, rookie of the year. So had quite a good start to his career, at least. And then I think he was paid about $50 million less. And then that covers the first 4 years, I think, of your contract. You could get a new 5 years. Yeah, you could get a guarantee, like you could get a newer contract, but generally, because there's a salary cap, your rookie deal tends to last if you're doing well, and then when your contract expires, you get a new deal. It's not like football where it's like you've got 3 years to go. Let's sign you to a new deal before someone else comes and signs you.
So what? I think this is hurting my head, but I think somebody said before that you get multiple picks and people trade picks. So they'll say, "Well, I've got first pick, you have that, but then I'm going to have the second, fourth, and fifth pick, or something."
Yeah.
Does that lead to the situation where somebody who was going to be first pick and earn the top money, the pick's been traded, but the team that's now first isn't picking him because he doesn't want him. So that was going to be first pick on top money is now fourth or fifth, and he's not earning what he would have earned had he not traded the picks.
And now you're understanding the drama of draft night, because there's nothing quite like that moment where and it's not always just necessarily that someone's coming in to take the pick. You'll have randomly every year, there's a guy who's like, there'll be sort of 10 guys who everybody who's tuned into anything for the last week will know. They'll know their height, their weight, their, like James will say, like the depressing story their family's been through. They'll know everything they did in college, what sort of player comparison they've got in the NFL. And you'll be expecting them to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And they'll have picked, there'll be all this sort of, he's going to this team because this fills this need. And then randomly, one of them won't do that. One of them will just start falling down the draft, and they'll start picking like, Romeo Leaf from Colorado College you've never even heard of, and it will go further down, and they'll just have this camera on this poor bloke who's just sitting there with his girlfriend who's normally furiously texting away in the corner, and you just see his money falling out. And then the worst thing is, if you the first round of the draft is on one day, and then the next 2 rounds are on the next night. So if you don't get drafted in the first round, you've got this horrible decision of, do I come back for the second night to sit there and not get picked again, or do I just go from home and do it on TV? It's
and
amazing.
A lot of the time, when you're watching it, there is that jeopardy of, as you said, Dave. Let's say the Chicago Bears, with whatever round it was, pick Justin Fields or whatever. So we needed a quarterback. We went out, we got him. Whereas if Justin Fields, let's say, for example, was going to go number 1, if the Bears had traded, you might have got a team that already has a renowned quarterback in place, didn't want Justin Fields as their first pick, so then select somebody else. And you see all these GMs and all these managers and the coaches, and they're sort of ticking off. It's like, shit, he's gone. Shit, he's gone. Like, oh, God, we wanted him. Shit, he's gone. You can see him on the phone trying to trade. And that's the jeopardy of the draft, because it's almost like a live capital market, I suppose. One team will go, oh my God, we wanted him, but he's already gone because the Chicago Bears, they were shit last year, so they've taken him. Oh my, right, well, actually, we'll go to our second guy. Oh my God, like the Cleveland Browns are crap, so they've taken him as well. And you can see them diving through their depth charts, thinking, Christ, we need to do something here. And there's people on the phone, and you've got this massive office full of staff sort of doing stats and this and that, and it is brilliant when you watch it. And there is that moment of, oh my God, like, and as Mark said, you'll see some people expected to go early, and they're just sitting there, and it's like, you better put that champagne on ice, we're not opening that yet, sort of thing. You think, oh my God.
And
that's
like,
fascinating because it's such a copycat league as well. That if one team passes, okay, that's fine. But then if a second team passes, everyone's on their phones going, right, why is nobody picking him? Why is no one taking him? You know, you've gone through this process. So the draft is always it's around April time, end of April. So the draft process has already started. So, you know, the scouts, and just as they do in normal football, scouts will be out there making their notes, getting everything ready. The teams won't be thinking about it yet, but they will have people in the organization who are already thinking about that. It's a year-long process that's going through. So everybody, when someone starts falling, everybody's going through their notes, speaking to, you know, like who's you know, what's wrong? Are there personal issues? You know, is he a bad teammate? Are there injury issues? What did the doctor say? What did someone else's doctor say? Call your source in the media, see if he knows what's going on. And you just see this kind of spiraling thing where ultimately it's a case of one coach going to another. Well, if he's not picking him, I'm not picking him.
I mean, I was just going to say, just quickly, the best example of this, if you've not seen it, is a few years ago there was a guy called Laramie Tunsil.
I was going to bring up that.
Yeah, and the night of the draft, he was like, he's the best player in the draft, regardless of position. He's the most solid player. So he's the big guys up front that do all the blocking. And he's on the left side, which is the blind side of the quarterback. It's considered to be the most important position on the offensive line. And about 20 minutes before the draft, this picture came up on Twitter of what looked to be Laramie Tunsil in a bomb.
Oh, it was the video.
With a hat, with a bomb on. And it was just like, is that Laramie Tunsil? Is that a Photoshop? And then very quickly it was like, Laramie Tunsil's family have denied that's him. And then a picture with him without the mask on, with it up to his head. It's like, oh no, that is Laramie Tunsil. And then the draft started, he thought he might be the first pick, and then he just watched this guy just like do. And it was while the draft was going on, you were getting like, I think it was his dad and loads of people,
stepdad or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, they're having this back and forth. Oh, his stepdad leaked it. So you've got this like real human drama going on while these guys are essentially picking a squad. It's like if transfer window was better.
Actually good.
Yeah, like the way that you kind of think transfer window is going to be, that's the draft. And I think I'm right in saying that out of everything that's on TV in the whole season in America, in a whole year, sorry, that the two most watched things are the Super Bowl and draft night, which is insane. It's not even a game; it's just people like human trading.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask one final question on the draft, unless anybody. That's not to shut everybody off, but I realise I asked a question. It's been going on for some time now, and there's a question on the screen that is probably good for you guys to discuss. I've got nothing to add to it, but in football, if you sign a player, it's always subject to personal terms and the medical. With the draft, is that like, well, personal terms don't matter because you're in the draft, and is a medical pre-done, or can it be nullified if it doesn't go through?
It's all pre-done. So there's this event called the Combine, which makes it sound even more like a cattle market, which is held every year, which is basically a mini Olympics for all the prospects. So anybody who's draft eligible stands up, they run, they jump, they lift. They do some exercises with the ball. Effectively, they get tested, so you get metrics, so you can compare who's quick, and it's less against each other, but more against previous years. So who's hitting that average speed for a running back or a quarterback or what have you. But part of that, and that's all broadcast. The bit you don't see broadcast are two elements. One, their meetings with the coach, which is just like a job interview that any of us have had, where you sit down and go through a series of questions, except obviously there's a slightly more technical, there's a memory element to it. And the other is incredibly intrusive medical checks. So if you're one of the top prospects, you might get looked over by a dozen doctors in a 3-4 day window so that they can check what's happening. Also, the colleges will supply all their medical records as well. Usually teams will go and get second checks, third checks, just to make sure that they're there. And it's really interesting because, in some cases it flags, things like congenital heart defects that players never knew they had. Or, we've had players where they've discovered that they've got leukemia as a result of some of these checks. So, it has a sort of life-saving element to it as well. But also, that knee that you thought was fine because the coach in college told you your knee was fine actually isn't fine at all when, you know, a slightly different professional has
it in a different way
and looks at exactly, and has a look at it from a slightly different angle. So it's very much buyer beware, and there's a whole thing with the draft where you see them on the phone to their GMs. This is a historic precedent that they, in the early days of the draft, you know, when, I mean, as Mark said, it used to be in New York. It literally used to just be in a room in a hotel in New York. With effectively go back to sort of the 50s, you know, coaches just putting names, general manager, just putting names on bits of paper and putting them in, and they'd call up the player to make sure that they were, you know, are you all right? Have you still got, you know, you're still running okay? Your legs
got two legs.
Still working? You still work? You know, you're
still breathing? Yeah.
Are you still here? Great. Can you get drafted? Now it's, you know, it's made into a slightly more of a ceremony, but it really is buyer beware. If you draft them and they're injured, that's on you.
Fair enough.
So, Dave, hopefully you've got enough information now on the draft. So when you ask us a question later about Haley Mills' performance and Whistle Down the Wind, we might be able to answer that.
I do have another question, but I'm going to leave it. I'm going to let you guys talk stuff I don't understand for a bit longer. And then I got another question. So come back to me when you're ready.
Well, let's let Paul ask his question as well. So Paul Kelly's chipped in, and he wanted to know if you could change one thing about football, like a rule or a fundamental dynamic of the game, what would it be and why? And as a disclaimer, Paul says he knows nothing about the game.
I think, you know, with the first game of the NFL season comes up, and I always try and get people, you know, I'm interested in lots of sport. I do a cycling podcast, and I can sit people down and talk about cycling, and they'll understand it once I've explained a few basic principles. They just get it. With the NFL, it's largely simple, but the one thing that I find always ends up being a problem, and it's a problem for fans, is what is a catch, right? If you could just make that rule easy to understand, it would mean that the NFL would have a lot more fans, right? Because the basic principle of the rules are you throw the ball to a guy and it's a catch as long as it's in both their hands and they've got both feet in bounds. That is it. That is the rule of a catch, except if they fall over and they put the ball down, it may or may not be a catch depending on who's refereeing. And if they roll over and they pick it up, sometimes that's a catch and it's not a catch. Other times, if they catch the ball and it's still in their hands and it rubs on the ground in the wrong way, then it's just madness. I just want a really simple rule that you could explain to a 5-year-old what is a catch, and the game would be so much easier.
Basically, so the catch is you have to secure the football. They talk about securing the football. So you might initially catch it, but then you might get taken to the ground and then your elbow might hit the ground and the ball spills. And then it's like, well, did he catch it? And if he did catch it, he's now dropped it. Is that then a turnover? Different rule, but is that then a turnover, or has he secured it? So is it a catch? Is it not? And it's just a little, and has he dragged his foot? Has he got both feet inbound? Has he done this? Has he done that? And it's just like, oh, come on, guys. So yeah, I'd take you putting that mark, yeah.
I'd agree with that as well. And just for the record, Jesse James did catch that ball.
Hard agree.
Good man.
I think
James, I don't know what you think.
It's the other thing that people always complain about, which I think is frightfully unfair, is it's so stop-start. And this is coming from a country that stops for 2 weeks to watch Wimbledon, literally the most stop-start game on the planet, watching two insipid men hit a ball back and forth for 3 seconds, then back.
Big fan of tennis, James.
20 seconds. And you talk about stop-start. That is stop-start. The NFL is less than that. But with the game getting quicker, and I don't think there's any reason that the game, anybody disputing the game's getting quicker. Instead of having 40 seconds between plays, I'd like to see, at least for periods of the game, a sort of power play element where you bring that down to, say, 25 seconds, maybe in the first quarter and the last quarter, where you have less time to do that. I think specifically in the first quarter, it just gets that momentum going, gets it flowing, and sort of would really build it up. I can't see it happening because there's player safety issues and everything about it. But if you want to get games started with a bang, then that quick, rapid initial turnover would add a really interesting dynamic to it. I
suppose it's a bit like when you talk about the offense going into their 2-minute drill or their whatever it may be, and it's that hurry up football. I'd quite like, as an extension to that, and I've just thought about it now because you've mentioned it. It might be quite nice if during the game, perhaps the defense and the offense, and now I know it's the same guy, it's the same coach, but when you're on the defensive side, you can then call that power play because you think, actually, you know what, we've got the offense on toast here, so we're really going to hurry them up. And similarly, as an offense, you think, Christ, their defense has been out for the last 7 minutes. Let's really get them on toast. Let's go for the kill. Let's issue that, whatever you call it. And it's like, actually, the defense are then not allowed to take any timeouts in that period, and they have to get to the huddle within a period of time because you think, Christ, come on, guys, we've really got these. Let's put the pedal to the metal and let's just crush them, sort of thing. So I quite like that idea, and you're not going to get it because, as you mentioned, sort of player safety and injuries and commercial timeouts and all of that sort of stuff. But
but we could dream, can't we? I'd also like to see the reintroduction. If I'm going to have a bonus one, the reintroduction from the original XFL of the running start for the kickoff. So instead of kicking the ball down the other end, they put the ball on the halfway line, and a player from each side, I think, stood on the 20, and the first player to pick up the ball then got the possession. It ended with injuries almost every single time.
I was going to say,
you can see why.
But maybe do it with the coaches.
But
just a flag.
The mascots.
The flagrant hit. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with the flagrant hit. I mean, I'm not playing the game, so hey, more the merrier. Let's crack on.
Interesting. So, just out of interest, have either of you two guys ever got to watch one of your prospective games in the States or in the UK?
I used to have a season ticket in the UK for the NFL, but I had to give it up recently because it was it was becoming quite difficult to get to the games and afford it, to be honest, because it's the price has gone up quite a bit since it started. I think when I first bought the ticket, I was paying 50 quid a ticket, and I had 3 tickets. And then I think the last time I was doing it was about 80, 90 quid a ticket, which is quite a big jump. And that was in about 5 years. So I had to give it up at the time. And then I tried to get another one recently and couldn't because it's still incredibly popular. So I'm sort of regretting it. But I saw the 49ers absolutely demolish the Jacksonville Jaguars, which they're the unofficial London team. So I was absolutely loving life, having the best time. I think we won by like 56-3. It was an absolute demolition. And I think if you've ever heard of Colin Kaepernick, he was the quarterback at the time, and this was right in his peak playing years. And then we got hit by one of those storms that hits the UK once every so often, and I couldn't go home. I had work the next day, and because nobody could go into work, I had to do an entire, I think, 18-hour shift wearing a Colin Kaepernick jersey that was very sweaty, having slept on my sister's sofa and had no sleep. So it was great.
Yeah, I've always tried. So the Giants played in obviously the very first London game against the Dolphins. That was the one I didn't go to, but I've been pretty much to every Wembley game since. I think I've missed maybe 1 or 2. So I've always been pretty committed to that. The NFL showed their great loyalty when they shifted some of the games to Tottenham by giving no preferential treatment to people who'd had season tickets for a decade plus. And just did a free-for-all when it went to Tottenham. So that's
Tottenham, why I didn't get one.
I thought it was just because you're a West Ham fan, but I
mean, there was that as well.
But it's difficult. I did manage to get some. Eventually, there was a guy on Twitter, bless him, who swapped season tickets with me. He wanted to go to the Jacksonville game, and I wanted to go to the Giants Green Bay game last year. So we ended up swapping season tickets. Which was great. So that was brilliant. Yeah, watched them in the States. I've watched them in San Francisco last year at Candlestick. I think it was the last year at Candlestick. Watched the Giants beat the 49ers there.
Rare success.
It certainly feels like it. At the time, it was happy hunting ground for us. I think the live experience, if you've not been, is fantastic. It is. They put on a good show on wherever you are, but it's certainly become a slightly less tawdry faux Americana experience over here. I do miss having the bands. We used to get some. I think we had Madness and
I remember Craig David doing.
Who else we had? We had Craig David. We had
Craig David doing an acoustic version of 7 Days at Twickenham, while the Cleveland Browns set a dog to run down the stadium. Was one of the most bizarre experiences I've had.
But you know, they had some pretty reasonable musical acts, not all to my taste, but you know, they've taken some of that razzmatazz away, but the occasion is still really good, and it's unlike anything else. I definitely urge anybody who hasn't been to make the effort to.
And the fan events before, if you're
exactly,
rallies are great, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think that part of that for me is one of the best experiences. Just to get to talk to. Now, I've never been fortunate to watch the game in the States, but you know, I've seen the Steelers. I saw the Steelers Viking game. We've been to watch the Bears game down there. We've been to quite a few of the games, and just like yourself, I'm an Arsenal fan, so I absolutely flat out refuse to put money in Daniel Levy's pocket on general principle. So Albert's asking a question. He wants to know, why has the price gone up?
Cost of living crisis, isn't it?
No,
it's.
I think it's a case of when it started, it was a cheap ticket. It was like cheap. There's no way around it. You know, I bought tickets to go and see West Ham play at Wembley, and I was paying 70 quid a ticket. And then I think the thing is, it's gone from, it got parity, and now it's gone to the point where they know that it's a limited number of people. There's a huge number of people want these tickets, and there's a limited number of spaces, and so they're charging what they think they're worth. And ultimately, they're getting that price, so they're not going to lower them anytime soon, I don't think.
I think there is another aspect to that as well, in that, you know, when this started, it was Roger Goodell, who's the commissioner who runs the NFL. He's the sort of the big chief. He put his neck on the line to get games over in Britain. It was incredibly unpopular in America. Hugely unpopular. I remember Sean Payton coming over and criticizing absolutely everything when he was in charge of the Saints. You know, like the coaches didn't like it, the players didn't like it, the fans, obviously, fans of one team, they lose a home game as a result of it. And, you know, they only get, you know, a handful of those. You get eight home games, 9 some years with the new system. But, you know, you don't get many opportunities. And to lose that is a really... you know, was a big take. So they had to have the tickets cheap because they wanted to show that the demand was there. Now it's a slightly different case. Now we're getting into the world where they're saying, well, you know, maybe possibly in 10, 15 years, we're talking about a franchise over there. So what would it take financially? You know, if we have 2 games, will people go? Yes. If we have 2 games in consecutive weeks, will people go? If we have 3 games, will people go? Are people coming over from Germany? Let's have a game in Germany as well and see if people could sell out London and Germany collectively. Yeah. And also, let's jack the price up to A, cover some of the costs, but B, to see if people were only going because it was cheap, or whether people will pay, you know, what they pay to go and watch a Premier League game normally. I think it'd be interesting if there were more games, what they do with a season ticket arrangement to try and make sure that we're not paying, you know, 1,500 quid for season tickets for 8 games, because I just don't think that's palatable. Maybe.
No, it is expensive, and like you say, you know, in terms of Albert, I guess the truth of it all is it's supply and demand.
Simple economics.
Yeah, and if
people want the tickets, you know, something's only worth what somebody's prepared to pay for it. So,
and I can tell you from our experience, you know, we've never had season tickets, but trying to get tickets to those games now it's now only possible. You know what I mean? The Germany game,
like Glastonbury
recently. Yeah.
Well, I on the hope that my wife A can't hear me and B won't watch back. We ended up going to Germany with a mate of mine, and we ended up getting hospitality at the last minute just to make sure we've got a ticket. We're like, well, we missed the first London game. We're not missing the first game in Germany as well.
I mean, we're sort of down a bit. You know, we've been to quite a few down in London, and initially, you know, the tickets were relatively accessible. You know, you'd queue, but you were pretty confident about getting them. And I think they were like 50 quid, 60 quid or something, or whatever they were, you know, middle tier. You know, we weren't by the halfway line. We were like, I don't know, level with the end zone or something, middle tier, something like that. And, you know, we looked, was it last year? We couldn't get them last year, but we looked and it's like 140 quid. And you're like, wow, like, that's not an end zone. That's not a halfway line. That's 140 quid for basically level with the end zone and second tier up. And you're not up in the gods because they were a little bit cheaper, and you weren't first tier because they were more expensive, and you think, wow, like, you know, you've got so many people, and it's about 140 quid, something like 150 quid.
But all that being said, you know, I've been to lots of different sporting events, you know, and I would say that the NFL tickets at Wembley are one of the best sort of value for money for the experience, you know, because a lot of events you pay, like I've been to plenty of gigs where you're paying sort of 60, 70 quid. And if you're not interested in the support, it's sort of, you're like, well, that's a lot of money. But I would say you get a whole day out of the NFL, almost invariably. Like the atmosphere outside the ground is incredible. You have they have like go and see the Super Bowl trophy and go and kick a ball as hard as you want and eat burgers and it's amazing. It's amazing.
But what happened initially was the first couple of years that we went, you do the fan rally. So we would go down on Saturday morning. We'd go to the fan rally on the Saturday. We'd stay overnight Saturday night, have a couple of beers in London. We'd go to the game on Sunday, then come home after the game.
Yeah.
And what they did for the first couple of years was if you had a ticket to the game, you could get into the fan rally. They then cottoned on to the fact that there's probably quite a lot more people that would want to just wander through the fan rally without going to the game. So then they opened it up, and obviously they went Regent Street, and they opened up Regent Street, and you could just wander through there. Whereas the first couple of years, I think we're in Trafalgar Square, and they actually ticketed it and gated it, so you had to show your ticket to get in, and that was great, and we loved it because we got a ticket to the game. But when you think commercially, they were probably excluding so many people that would have just wandered through, perhaps bought a beer for 5 or 10 minutes and then wandered off and not go to the game, that you can sort of understand why they then opened it up.
Absolutely. Yeah, we did an OB when we were doing our podcast, and we met some really interesting characters. Most of them were going to the game, but not all of them. And
I was just about to say, it was one of my favorite things was just, so we used to do little packages, like self-contained bits in the podcast, which was just whenever there was a moment we could capture, we just kind of grab people. So like when the NFL released the Colour Rush jerseys with these new jerseys, I hung around London College of Fashion and showed some students like their jerseys and got them to rate them. And got some great comments on that. But then I was like, oh, that went really well. Like, how can we do this? Oh, the fan rally, we'll just go and talk to people. And it was, people talking about their team seasons. And then every now and then you just grab hold of someone who was wearing like an orange jumper and you assume they're a Bears or a Brown or a Bengals fan. And it turns out that they were just someone wearing an orange jumper who just got lost on Regent Street. I was like, so how do you think the Browns are going to do this year? And they just look at you like, I don't know what you're talking about. Please leave me alone.
That'd be Dave. 100% that'd be Dave.
That will be Dave, yeah.
But it was also like that time. My favorite thing about when the NFL games happen in London is it's this amazing bit of timing where there's this great import of Americana at that time. So you have the Super Bowl, the NFL London games often happen at the same time that Comic-Con happens. So I remember on many, many times getting on the train that has picked up people from Comic-Con and the NFL, just picking up normal commuters coming back from London who just have this complete like 1,000-yard stare on their face because they can't work out what's wrong. they don't want to speak because they don't know what's happened, and you just see them going, Agnes, what's happened? Like just whispering to you. It's one of the best things.
Quality. So Albert's got another question. He wants to know, why do you prefer this sport then over the likes of rugby? You know, the origins are fairly similar. It's not a dissimilar sport, I guess. Are you guys rugby fans?
Yeah, I am. I played it in school. I'm looking forward to the World Cup, particularly as Scotland aren't terrible for once. So
yeah, but England are. So England are get out of the group. That's whole different.
So yeah, no. Basically, if it's a ball with a sport, I'm interested. Keep me away from the transport-based sports, but and tennis. But pretty much all the others.
We got that. We got that.
I'll watch it. I mean, where it stands with rugby, I think rugby has a physicality to it that people think the NFL doesn't have because people are why are they wearing padding? Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
I think if you watch the NFL, you understand how they use the padding as weaponry. Less so these days, but it's part of what they've got. The impact is so much greater, and you watch the speed of the NFL compared to the speed of rugby. It is so much faster as a sport. Is one of the reasons why it's in short bursts. Is that the intensity of the play is so significant. I think the reason I love it is some of the reasons we've talked about. You know, you never know one year to another who who, if the terrible team is going to be terrible again, or whether they've got a chance to be good. That system of parity, that sort of never-ending sort of flow of talent, the drama that comes with that and that comes through the draft, plus then obviously that kind of the intensity of what is at its heart an incredibly physical game, but played very tactically. It is the ultimate violent chess. Whereas rugby is has a very different flow, and yes, it's got some similarities to it, but it's a lot more incidental in the way it happens, with sort of broader tactics. The amount of set pieces, everything in the NFL is a set piece. Not everything in rugby is a set piece. So it's that kind of regimented violence that I think I love the best about.
I think for me it's and NFL players get done a little bit of a disservice in terms of it's you said it's violent chess, and it is, and you need to have a certain intellect to play chess, and therefore you need a certain intellect, a certain level of playing intellect to play in the NFL. It's not just two lines of huge blokes just crash helmets and then one guy throws a ball to another guy. There's a lot more nuances in terms of how do you want to position that guy, where do you want to move him, how do you do that, how do you get one up over your direct opponent, and all of that. And there's a level of sporting intellect that actually, unless you, I say a hardcore fan, unless you are a fan, you sort of don't realize, and you sort of don't get the nuances of that. And that's what I love, is that the very, very big guys and the very, very small guys can be equally as important as each other at any one time because of the jobs that they do on the field. And for me, it's the thinking man's chess. It's the maneuverability. It's the trying to outwit your opponent by coming. I mean, you only have to look at the playbooks of these guys from college. That they have to learn within the first month or 2 months. You see the documentaries and they go home, and they're literally in the hotel rooms. They go wading through pages and pages of photos of, well, if this is in this position, this is what happens, and this is where that blocker is going to go, and this is the call for this play, and this is where you move, and it literally is just like violent chess. And I think, James, you're right. I think it's a fantastic analogy, and for me, it's that and the level of sport and intellect that you need in order to perform at the very high level.
I'd add to that as well and say I played rugby in school. I'm still not entirely sure of the rules of rugby, and I played it for sort of 3 or 4 years. And I'll watch it, and I'm still slightly baffled by some elements of it. And I watch it. No, I wouldn't say I watch it religiously, but I watch it. I would say I'm a fairly passionate rugby fan, but there are still some elements that I'm a bit like, I'm not quite sure I understand exactly what's going on there. And I would wager that most rugby fans, if they deep down would admit that there's a lot of stuff that when you're watching it, you don't really understand exactly what's going on. I think you have to be playing it. Obviously, most people who were playing it probably knew what they were doing. I was just told to go and hit that guy and get that ball.
Run in that direction and smash that guy.
Going back to
less running, more hitting with my with my skill set.
Going back to Albert's point, though, I think to give another analogy, if you've watched the World Championships in athletics, rugby is like the decathlon. It's someone that's got to be good at all of the elements, whereas the NFL has enough space that you have specialists. So it's like watching the guy like Usain Bolt at one position, and then watching, Andre Duplantis doing, the pole vault and then other. So you've got all these great sort of individuals that are the best at their sport. Not so long ago, the 49ers had a guy called Marquise Goodwin, who was an Olympic medalist in the long jump playing in the NFL. There's been several Olympic 100-meter gold medalists that have played wide receiver. You have guys that are the very best athletic talents at what they do. I think, wasn't Robert Griffin III, he was a quarterback. He had the world 400-meter hurdles junior record. You have these incredible athletes. It's so, like James said, it's so much quicker. Everything happens so fast. And I would say per minute on a game, the NFL gives, or on a weekend, the NFL gives more highlight moments for your memory. There's always a play that you go away and go, I can't believe he did that. Whether it's a catch, a tackle, an interception, a guy who's run around everyone. There's always a great moment every week. A guy who's throwing the ball while he's falling over. It's incredible.
Cue Devin Hester. Kickoff return.
The phenom.
The phenom. Kickoff return. Super Bowl. Oh, yeah.
I know Adam's itching to wrap up because we're going way past the hour. But Mark, you just that question led into earlier. I said I got another question, and it's from another film, and it'll be a brief answer.
Is this about NFL? You're not going to give us like
if it's Flash Gordon, that might be okay.
No, it's a film called 12 Orphans.
Okay.
And I can remember it because I only watched it at the weekend, and it was about 12 orphans, and they set up a coach. And a coach went there to work at the school and to get a football team going. And he's apparently accredited as one of the first coaches or the first coach to start playing the football different by actually passing and running. So moving and passing the ball and running and catching the ball rather than just all lining up and bashing into each other and see who ends up with it. And that was just interesting. That wasn't my question. My question was, in that film, he had a defensive coach and then him. And it struck me that although he was the main coach, it was almost like the both of them coached and like, you're specialist, so you do that. And he was like making the calls during the game, so it wasn't like a single manager like you have in football. Is that what it's like? You've just been talking about all these different specialists. So during a game, do different coaches call different plays?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not only will you have they're referred to as coordinators. So you'd have an offensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator, but now, and then you've got a head coach. Now the head coach may also be one of those, but you tend to have at least an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. But now you've even got sort of, passing game coordinators, and you'll have running game coordinators. And then within each of those disciplines, each of the position group will have their own coach. So you'll have an offensive line coach, and you'll have wide receivers coach and a quarterback coach and the linebackers coach. And, every position group is coached slightly differently. And then above that, you'll have the play callers that sit there. So when you watch the game and you see all those people up and down the sidelines, they've all got some sort of responsibility, mostly from a sort of coaching perspective as well. And then you've got sort of quality assurance people that make sure that the plays are being called in the right way, and that the players are doing the right thing, who are all watching specific groups of players. So the whole thing is a whole cottage industry of sort of coaching and leadership. It's fascinating as a dynamic. As a player, it must be hugely disorientating to know who you're taking your instructions from it sometimes.
And if you ever get the opportunity to watch Hard Knocks or whatever the Netflix equivalent was, I can't think what it was, but they're actually very good at setting the scene of a franchise and talking about the running back coach and the quarterback coach and the offensive line, and they do frame NFL quite well in my opinion, and you can watch them, and obviously they focus on certain characters and certain star players and stuff, but they do a good job of giving you a little bit of background in terms of all of the things that go into it. So I'm a big fan of the the Hard Knocks sort of series. And was it not Undiscovered? What was the other one? Can't think what it was back in the day, but yes, but they're very good. If you ever get a chance to watch them, they are very good.
They are.
And on your little Flash Gordon throwaway, he actually was an NFL player as well.
Yeah.
That's it. Someone else picked up upon it.
Oh, who do you play for?
Oh, that uniform must have been the Chargers. But anyway, that was a pun. Just to wrap it up then, because before we go around with say our goodbyes, let's just quickly, because we normally keep these episodes to around about an hour-ish. Just quickly give us your Super Bowl, throw all team allegiances to one side. Who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl this year? Short answers. Go on, we'll start with our guest first. Who's that?
Chiefs.
Chiefs. Yeah.
Hard to look past them at the moment. I think people are writing off the Bills a bit too readily as well. I think it's whoever wins that AFC Championship game. I think it's probably those two.
I as much as I'd love to say the Bears, I think the Bills are. I think the Bills are decent, and I agree with you, James. I think whoever comes out of that game goes on to win it.
Yeah. I think the Chiefs are probably my pick. There's a guy, I'd like to see do well at the Bucs, Baker Mayfield. I'd like to see him do well there. I like Baker, I do. I think I think there's just something there with that guy. I'd love to see him do well. Ex Oklahoma Sooner player. So for me, I'd love to see him. Dave, who do you think is going to win?
The Philadelphia Pelicans.
Yeah, well, it is a bird, but the Pelicans are New Orleans side in the NBA. But yeah, it's the Eagles. We don't want to see them win. Nobody here wants to see them win. Let's make that clear.
Okay.
As long as they don't win it, I don't really mind.
And Mark, holding your shirt up is not helping me at all.
Oh, it's the only one where it's got the name written on it. So I was sort of being helpful with that.
That really doesn't help him. That really doesn't help him.
Yeah,
It's a bit small. I can't see it.
No, fair enough. So then, like I say, we keep these episodes to around about an hour. So we're going to go round. We are going to say goodbye, and then we're going to say we'll see you again next week. That's what we do. But as we say goodbye this week, we're going to answer Stuart's question, God bless him, because he's asked us who is our favourite player of all time. So as you say goodbye, give us your favourite player and the reason why.
Okay. Mine is Frank Gore, I think I'm going to say. So thanks. Bye.
Nice.
I'll go for my favourite of recent times. My favourite all time is a guy called Lawrence Taylor, but for recent times, Odell Beckham, just an absolute, just revolutionised the position. Did things which the Giants haven't had a quarterback do, haven't had a wide receiver do that in generations. So he was just so exciting to watch. I'm sure you're hoping he's less good now he's a Raven, but which I think he will be. But just completely put me away.
I mean, Lawrence Taylor was a legend. Odell Beckham, that catch just transformed a whole generation of people into watching NFL. So fair play to him for that. For me, Walter Payton, just like sweetness, just unbelievably good. And I suppose slightly more recent times, Brian Urlacher, I just thought he had everything. I thought he was just an absolute beast on the field and phenomenal at everything he did. So yeah.
Brian Urlacher was good. I just remember that one time that Jerome, the bus bet, ran straight over the top of
Oh my
him.
God, let's forget all the times that he absolutely put him down at the 1 yard line or whatever. We'll forget them, shall we?
We will, yeah. Dave, any favourite players you care to mention?
Yeah, I mean, this is our closing goodbyes as well, and we normally do with Adams. We do it once and then we do it again. So I'm going to do mine. I'm going to do mine this time. I just want to say thanks to you guys, Mark and James. Apart from a couple of spells early on, my eyes glazed over where you guys were all talking about players and teams and who's going to win. It just completely lost me. But the other stuff we talked about, it's just actually fascinating. And all of you four are obviously very knowledgeable about this. And actually, as a conversation, it's actually really interesting. And that draft process is just completely nuts. And then the way you have 4 billion people running a team on a touchline is just completely nuts. The fact it takes about 3 weeks to finish a game is completely nuts. Apart from all of that, it's been really, really enjoyable. And for my player, and I'm going to say something now that you'll either go, yeah, fair enough, or Dave, wrong sport. The fridge.
I could predict you.
Yeah, absolutely. Chicago Bears player. Absolutely. William Perry. Good man.
There we go.
There you go.
I don't know who he was. Where he played.
Scored a touchdown. Scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl.
He did. It was a good shout, that is, dude. Gaz is on side with that one, no doubt. For me, the one player I would say, and there's a glut of players to choose from with the Steelers, but it was Troy Polamalu for me. Love watching that guy play. He was just a little bit different. He was somebody who was very, very unique. So, Stuart, go check that guy out. So, yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for sharing your stories and sharing your opinions. We've loved hearing them. And thank you very much for educating Dave. I think he got a lot out of it. I think the thing is, for the NFL, there's a lot of show and there's a lot of theatre, but there is substance behind it. And I think we've talked about that a lot tonight. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed listening. Hopefully we can get these guys on again in the future. We can talk some more NFL, because I think, to be fair, we've only really sort of touched the top of the subjects.
So much more you could talk about. So much more with these guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Adam said. Loved having you guys on. Mark, James, hugely appreciative of you giving up your time coming on. We'd love to have you back on again, talking NFL, talking midway through the season, and all of our predictions going horrendously wrong. And I think maybe just trying to get your thoughts on, and we touched on it a little bit, maybe a UK franchise, and is that likely to happen? And where we think the game's going to go. So I absolutely would love to have you guys back on. You know, and I look forward to the time that we can do that.
Indeed. Don't start that one now on an hour and 20. So yeah, thank you for listening, guys, and we'll see you next week.